There are many ways to come to optimal happiness. You can carefully observe phenomena, break them down into finer and finer distinctions until you see the vibrant void that is their nature. That's sort of the observing, and we use that a lot here. There's another strategy that can be successful, which is more the nurture positive kind of thing. If you go all the way and develop a absorption level of concentration on positive image, talk, and emotional body, you literally become that. And your former identity passes away, or at least is suspended for a while. So I reckon that, at least in theory, nurture positive could be a path to radical freedom. And in fact, this is one of the major claims of Vajrayana practice in Tibet, that these so-called deity yoga practices, they're not just concentration exercises. They are a component by component replacement of the inner see-hear, of the ordinary human see-hear feel, with an alternate archetypal identity. The reason to do it is not to go insane, to think that you're a myth. The reason to do it is it's not shamanic possession. It's a very different critter. It's done systematically in order to gain insight into the arbitrary nature of self-identification. So part of the influences on me in developing the way of teaching that I teach, well, I'm very influenced by early Buddhism that took the divide and conquer strategy, which is, okay, you break it down into pieces, sub-pieces, and eventually you sort of know it to death and love it to death, and you become free. The it, in this case, is self. Okay, so that's what sort of leads to the focus-in approach that I use. However, the nurture positive, working explicitly with image, talk, emotional body, and in Vajrayana you also work with the physical body by making mudras. Working with those components, if you develop enough concentration, that's why they call it deity yoga. Yoga has many meanings. One of the meanings is exercise. Another meaning of yoga is merging or becoming. So you merge with, you actually become the archetypal content that you create. And as I say, it's not to go insane, and it's not to shamanically channel something. It's to gain insight into the arbitrary nature of self-identification. If it's like playing with identity, like with Lego toys. It's like a Tinker Toy kit. You put one identity together, then you take it apart, and then you put another one together, then you take it apart. Because it's not just one deity yoga, it's like a sequence of deities. And I take that as a path that could, in theory, give you insight into no self. So that's a whole way of working. Then there's sort of Zen, which has a lot of different aspects to it, which I won't go into, but just one of the aspects in Zen is merging of inside and outside by pouring all your attention on the physical sight, physical sound, physicality of the body. There's only so much real estate in consciousness. So if all the water sloshes out, that inner world contracts and vanishes. And you merge, you become one with what was formerly out. So that's a way of working. Then there's a whole other approach which might be called the meditation of no meditation, where you simply drop all efforting. That contrasts with the other ways of working, right? You can take the components of self and untangle them and see their vibrant void nature. Or you can merge with an archetype. The ordinary identity contracts, a mythic identity expands. Once again, you get insight into the arbitrary nature of self-identification. Or you can merge out, see out, hear out, feel out. But those all require effort. Particularly the deity yoga type practice. You're having to actually create intentionally the image, the talk, the body sensations, and so forth. So very contrasting with that is, okay, drop all efforting. So that's a do nothing kind of approach. That works for some people well. A contrasting approach to all of the above, which I don't normally do as part of the system, but it's definitely something that is powerful and something to look into if you're interested, is this whole sort of self-inquiry way of working. It's been discovered and rediscovered in different forms, different cultures, different times. It tends to be associated with some of the Hindu Advaita teachings and so forth. There's some great Advaita teachers online that have had really deep experience using this approach. In Sanskrit, it's called Atma Vichara. Vichara means to investigate, and Atma means self. But it also is another part of some of the Zen teachers. Who am I? What are you? In fact, that was the koan that my very first teacher gave me, Okamura Keishin Sensei. That was the last time when he and I were together in Japan. I was going back to the US, and he said, okay, here's your koan. Who are you? What are you? And it's like, okay, how do I work on this koan? Turn the light back on itself. What do you mean? Swim back to the source of the stream of consciousness. What's that mean? Just do it. So that was sort of I'm paraphrasing, but that was sort of the dialogue, okay? There's not much you can, it's not an algorithm, okay? It's like groping. You're pushing back, pushing back, pushing back. A question, koan, who am I? Or where does thought come from? Or who sees? You can choose any language that you want. There's a lot of ways to formulate the question. The important thing to realize is this is koan work. This is not an intellectual question that you're going to say, oh, I am, and there's going to be a substantive, and now you have answered that question. That's not what this is about. This is about each arising of self, you're trying to sort of metaphorically look over your shoulder and see where it came from. As I say, it can be formulated in a lot of different words, but the method is the same, essentially the same, or very similar. For some people, that ends up very much related to that spacious thing that we were doing, where you start to get a sense that, okay, I'm the space all around looking in. That might be a stage that you pass through and you disidentify with the content of experience. A good teacher of this method won't let you mistake a fixated sense of witness as the true self, though. If it's at all fixated in space, like, okay, I'm over here kind of thing, well, no, you need to look back a little further. Interestingly, it's not just in Hinduism and some of the Buddhist schools of Zen, but you actually find this method, or something a little like this, used in some of the Theravada traditions, where they're trying to sort of like inquire, push it back. I've seen some Theravada teachers that teach this way. And really interesting is some anonymous guy in the 15th century in England hit upon this. And I would almost be certain that he hit upon it without anyone pointing it out to him. He just hit upon it, just discovered it. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's anonymous, but there's a work of literature he wrote. That's The Cloud of Unknowing, a classic in both Catholicism and Anglicanism. Episcopalian, in other words. In there, you can see him struggling to try to describe something that had no tradition in Europe. And, but you could see it was really important for him. I should have prepared, showed you the section, but I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, keep beating away at the cloud of ignorance with the sword of love of God, pushing back to experience your existence, what lies behind you, moment by moment. I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I'll go find the quote on the internet. But it's something to that effect. It's very obvious that he's struggling to describe something like a self-inquiry process. Seems obvious to me anyway. And I find it extraordinary that someone would have hit upon this independently and within the context of, that was pre-Reformation, so within the context of Catholicism, basically. That's a whole other way of working. And the approaches are, it's nice because the approaches contrast. So each person can find one or a combination of these that they can relate to. So there's a wide range of ways that you can go about. And personally, you know, some people are sort of mono-spiritual. They do best with just one approach. But I find that a lot of people are bi or multi. I certainly am. All those approaches to me seem like one approach. I would say that the closest thing within what I do to the self-inquiry way of working is just not gone. Can you see why? Can you see the parallelism? What's the question that self-inquiry asks?
Where does it come from?
Where does it come from? What's the question that just not gone answers?
Source. Why? Where does it go to?
It answers the question, where does it go to? Because you're developing an appreciation for where things go to when they disappear. Now I know initially, gone is defined very, very carefully within my system. All or part of something abruptly subsides and you notice it, okay? That's the definition of gone. And you might wonder, why set up such a weird definition? Why language it that way? Well, where something goes to when it disappears is the same place it comes from when it where A goes to when it vanishes is where B comes from in the next instant when it manifests. So an inquiry method, you're sort of, okay, A has arisen, where did it come from? You're trying to sort of look back to the source of the stream. Turn the light back on itself, turn consciousness back on itself, or a very common paradigm, be conscious of consciousness. So the gone is A just disappeared. And if you briefly look in that direction, you're going to see that that's where B is going to pop out of. And what is it? Well, it's emptiness. That's the tranquil side of the process. So that's one side of emptiness. And then the dynamic side of the process is how emptiness breaks apart. It happens to everyone hundreds of thousands of times a day. It's so subtle, we just don't notice it by and large. But the nothing, which is not extended in time and space, it breaks apart. And that happens with a kind of bouncy spontaneity, okay? Just happens. And there's a sense of space effortlessly spreading, and at the same time there's a sense of space effortlessly collapsing. In terms of traditional Theravada formulations, they talk about udayabhaya, or rising passing. At some point, your awareness is dominated by this cyclic sense of there's just rising and passing, and you're real detached from the content. It's just risings, passings, risings, passing. Some of it's pleasant, some of it's unpleasant, some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't make sense. But you're you have a sense that you're in contact with some primordial ordering principle that is a pre-human order, the order of nature. Human order is my body's comfortable and my mind's got answers. This pre-human order is what precedes? Free energy entropy, maybe. That's my guess. That's what causes things to pratitya samutpadati, to fall up into existence. So a stage comes, and typically you pass through this stage 10,000 times in a lifetime, but it just becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. With each new challenge level, you sort of have to go through the same thing again. That's one way to look at progress. There's a lot of different ways to map progress, but one is, okay, can you be in an arising passing situation with this level of pain in your leg? Okay, well, how about the next level of pain in your leg? Well, how about ache in your heart? Well, how about? And when you reach the point where it doesn't matter how big or how complex or what the content is, but you can instantly be in an arising passing situation, then you're doing pretty good. However, after the arising passing thing, or on a continuum in a sense with that, is a sense of passing as it's arising. No sooner is it arising, but it's already passing. This is described in the classic Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification, written by Buddhaghosa. It's also described by the Anglican poet T.S. Eliot. In my beginning is my end. That's how one of his lines open. Okay, in my beginning is my end. It's like already dying as soon as it's born. That's taking a temporal slice. As soon as it's arising, it's already passing. But spatially, that means as soon as it's spreading, it's already collapsing. Because remember, sensory events occupy time-space volumes. They last for a period of time, and they have width, depth, and height. Check it out. We did it in the group process. Does your see, hear, feel not have width, depth, and height? It does. So as soon as it's spreading in terms of width, depth, and height, it's already collapsing along all three of those dimensions. So that's sort of the extreme version of arising passing, is like passing as it's arising, spreading effortlessly as it's collapsing effortlessly. And in the folds of that vibrant dance of space are born the inner and outer see, hear, feel that create the surrounding scene experience, and the I have a self looking out at the surrounding scene experience. There's a metaphor from the Vijnanavada school based on a snail, okay? The snail's eyes, they belong to the same snail, okay? But they come out on these two different stalks, and then they can actually face each other, okay? Consciousness comes from one formless source, and it's visual, auditory, somatic, but half of it seems out and the other half seems in, but it's really just consciousness looking at consciousness. So those sensory experiences arise in the vibrating folds in between this effortless spread and collapse of space. So that sense of space effortlessly spreading and collapsing, that's the dynamic side of emptiness. And then at some point, that process sort of comes to an end. Expansion and contraction cancel out. There's a flat line, but that's not the right metaphor. It all collapses back down to the next gong. So sometimes people like to talk about non-dual. I mentioned that term a few minutes ago, Advaita, non-dual. So non-dual is another way to say one. Or it's another way to say healing a wound, healing an alienation, healing a cleft that separates. So there's a lot of healings that have to take place. One is the seeming separation of inside and outside. If you were listening carefully to what I said, you should have an idea of how that duality can be transcended. And to transcend the duality of inside and outside, that's no small thing. What are some of the ways? Well, I actually mentioned a few of them. One is you can allow out to expand while in contracts. In other words, the see out, hear out, feel out of the surrounding scene, you pour all your attention on that. So much so that the see in, hear in, feel in of the reactive self contracts to nothing. And then your identity just goes out and inhabits what was formerly other. That's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is the outer scene arises and there's a reactive self. It also arises. However, there's so much habitual concentration, clarity, and equanimity in those circuits that both the outer scene and the inner self arise as a waveform. And so the two waves completely interpenetrate. And there is a oneness of inside and outside as a kind of unified dance of energy. That's another way that you can have you can break down the duality between inside and outside. One of the major paradigms of enlightenment in world mysticism is the oneness. In Taoist terms, it tends to be oneness of inside and outside. In theistic religions, it tends to be oneness of the soul with God. How do you experience oneness of the soul with God? Well, how about experiencing yourself arising in between the two sides of God, moment by moment? That would do the trick. Especially if it's your screwed up self. That would be really good. To experience your screwed up self being loved into existence by the dance of space, moment by moment. It's pretty good. It might help you be a little more loving of your screwed up self. How to achieve a sense of oneness of inside and outside is admirable. But I would say that it's not the deepest experience of non-dual. The deepest experience of non-dual comes about when the duality or separation between the one nothing and the 10 trillion somethings, when that separation is healed, that's real non-dual awareness. What in the world is he talking about? So, the one nothing that is the source, that's what Gone points to. That's also what you see when you're successful in self-inquiry, when you see where you come from, you see where you go to. That's the one nothing. Then there's the 10 trillion somethings of self and world. Another way to put it is emptiness and form. So the Heart Sutra says shunyata, rupam shunyata shunyataiva rupam. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Now it's very interesting. They put it both ways. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. That is the entire path viewed from one point of view. That's only one point of view, but that's the entire path right there. The first half of the path is form is emptiness. That's dissolution. That's loving and knowing form to death. Within the Jewish meditation tradition, it's called bitul hayesh, the annihilation of the something. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid to just sit there and totally let go of the ordinary ordering principle, the ordinary human ordering principle, which I reiterate, what did I say the human ordering principle is?
Body is comfortable.
Body is comfortable and mind has answers. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the normal human ordering principle. In fact, we're humans. Mostly that's what we need, but we also need a larger context, a pre-human ordering, the source of the human ordering, presumably. So don't be afraid to just let it all collapse into what seems to be chaos. Because what's interesting is what seems to be random is, in fact, what causes order to arise. Entropy. So you sort of surrender to that. And you let the somethingness just be torn apart. And you throw caution to the wind, and for a period of time abandon totally the ordinary ordering principle. Doesn't matter if the body's comfortable or not. Doesn't matter if my mind is confused or not. Annihilation of the somethingness. And what will happen is it'll all become rising, passing, arising, passing, and then it will just be passing, passing, and then you will begin to see how that nothing molds each moment. And each moment is one of the 10 trillion somethings that I'm alluding to. The 10 trillion somethings of self and world. This is happening here. I'm experiencing this here. My mind's doing this. My body's doing this. They're doing that. We're over here. It's 10 trillion somethings that constitute a life. How can we connect, have an unbroken, a non-dual link between the one nothing over here and the 10 trillion somethings? Well, this is about the deepest principle that I am personally aware of in practice. What the umbilical cord, the thing that allows for a smooth and continuous transform from the one nothing to one of the 10 trillion somethings back to the one nothing. What connects is the two doings. The two doings are the two sides of emptiness. Space, effortlessly spreading and collapsing. They are the two sides of zero. And in the folds arises one of the 10 trillion somethings. And whatever it is, a thought, a body sensation, a sight, a sound, whatever it is, it's always embraced from without and within by the two doings. So it, the ordinary experience, is touched by the two doings, but the two doings are in fact the two sides of the one nothing. And that allows you to have an experience thousands and thousands of times a day of this miraculous arising of something from nothing. Form is emptiness. That's the path of dissolution. Emptiness is form. If you are heroic enough to do that, you get to live the rest of your life seeing each sensory event as this kind of miracle that arises sitting on the totality of the universe. It seems like you're participating in that process. And in the Hebrew, that's called Bri'ah Yesh Me'ayin. The continuous creation of yesh, things, met from ayin, the divine nothingness. That's a spontaneous, bouncy process. And because of that, you look upon each thing as sort of sharing your womb. And in the Jewish tradition, at least the Jewish mystical tradition, it is said that through that participation comes about something called tikkun olam, the mending of the world.